And like Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. And it's just, I say that in every interview or anything I do. I always say that quote because it's just so profound to remember that we're not alone in this process and we have to be vulnerable. And it's scary to do it. But again, you got to take that risk. It's so important. That's how we shift the collective's consciousness. It's how we do it. It starts with us. Going back to that, it starts with us on an individual basis.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. And welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. So the guest on today's podcast is somebody that I met last year during a Somatic Breathwork training that I was a part of. She started her journey in life as a second grade teacher, only to quickly find that it wasn't her true path or calling. Entering into the fitness world as a personal trainer, she found her passion in wanting to help others to achieve their goals. Following her deep passion for astrology, she has trained under several renowned teachers to expand her knowledge on the subject. She now focuses on the breath, body, and soul connection, helping to transform their lives by gaining more knowledge on who they are at their very core. So I introduce to you my friend, colleague, and fellow spiritual seeker, Hali Bailey. Hali, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Hello, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank
So why
you.
don't you just take a few moments to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and really just kind of about your journey?
Yeah, so what a journey it's been. Where do I begin? I'll start with the personal training journey. I started my personal training journey in 2017. I met my now husband. He was a personal trainer as well. And I was fascinated with how the body could change so quickly. It was super basic too, basic strength training, changing your nutrition. And I saw how quickly the results could come into fruition. So I was blown away by the process. So I decided I wanted to become a personal trainer as well. And shortly after, my whole world got rocked. And I lost two very important people back to back in the same week, my grandma and my stepfather. And it completely shifted my world. Everything in my life completely changed. And that is when my spiritual awakening happened, more or less. I was really lost. I didn't know which direction to head in after that moment. Everything that I thought I knew was completely broken, essentially. And so, yeah, a few months later, my husband and I moved I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, and then came to Scottsdale that following August. So they passed in May, and this is 2018. And then in August, we moved, and I had no direction. I felt aimless. I felt like I had no purpose. And so it was a really challenging few years in my life of trying to understand who I am. What am I doing here? What do I even want to do? And that summer, I also received my first astrology reading. So that planted a huge seed, and met my now mentor, Chris, who I love so much. But yeah, so from there, I went on this deep journey inward around, what do I want to make of this life? And so flash forward to 2020, the world shut down. I decided to really go inward, and I signed up for Deborah Silverman's astrology school. It's a 12-week program. And I felt so lit up inside. I felt like this was my calling. So I started giving readings, and it felt like it wasn't everything, though. So that was in 2020. So all through 2021, I was doing this deep self-discovery, and then flash forward to 2022. So last year, I went to my first breathwork session with the training that we connected in, Somatic Breathwork. And I released more trauma in that one session than I did in any talk therapy session that I had ever gone to. I feel like I never went to school for to be a psychologist or anything. It feels like it's just kind of an innate gift that I
Mm.
have, and so I would run around circles around my therapist, and I never felt like I was getting to the root of what needed to be healed. And breath work was that modality that allowed me to go deeper within and clear out the trauma that was holding me back from 2018 when, I saw my stepfather in the room, and I literally left my body in that moment. I didn't realize that I left my body, and I was frozen from that point on until I did the breathwork session, and I finally came back into my body. And it was the prayer, or it was the answer to all of my prayers, because I felt like what I was doing with just the personal training and the astrology, it wasn't enough. So then the breath work came in and completely shifted my perspective on healing, from switching or stepping away from that fix it mentality, which is all what personal training is about. And even astrology to a certain extent of like, well, I feel broken, so let's look into the chart to see how I can fix myself, versus understanding that we're whole and complete. So, yeah, and now I'm certified. I've met you in the training, and I'm so grateful for that. And I am loving holding these sessions, and it's been the missing piece to my work, because now I'm able to incorporate all of the energy from the heavens and working with the cycles of life, and really trying to ground that into our bodies, which has been so powerful to witness the transformation within myself, but also with my clients that I've been working with. And yeah, and it's just been such a journey, a beautiful journey, a lot of highs and a lot of lows, but I wouldn't change anything, honestly, because it's all been building blocks to get me to this point in my life.
Mm, that's wonderful, and such a great story. And it's interesting at how those big challenges that we face in life really catapult us back to the journey that we probably were always meant to be on in the first place, but we just didn't know it in that time, and we didn't know how it was going to look. But now you've kind of gone through the phases, and I think that's probably true for all of us, where we find these different pieces, and then you find that one piece. It's just like putting a puzzle together. Eventually you find that one piece that all of a sudden interconnects all the other ones and shows us the full picture. But it isn't until we find that missing piece that we're just searching and searching and searching and searching, not quite sure exactly what it is that we're looking for until it presents itself.
There's so knowing my chart, which has been so helpful to know my own blueprint and my psychology makeup and understanding. So I have Pluto on my midheaven, and essentially in English, it means like my career is going to be constantly transforming and evolving. So knowing that gave me the permission to just say, let go and let God and surrender into whatever is meant to be. It's going to happen. And I said a prayer at the beginning of 2022, because I felt helpless of like, I have so much wisdom, but it's not grounded quite yet. And it's not integrated yet. And then the breath work came in, and I really believe that faith is that missing piece for us all. Like, we have to lean into faith in order to open up to the possibilities of what could come into our field, but we have to be open to it. If we're closed off to it, then we're never going to get the signs or the messages. But if we open ourselves up, the possibilities are endless, and this life really does become really meaningful once we do open that realm.
Yeah, that's a beautiful key that you touch on, because it's like, if we don't have that perspective of openness, instead we have the perspective of, well, this is what I can intellectually imagine, so this is how I want it to happen. But what if the true reality is that the universe, God, goddess, spirit, whatever name you want to put on it, has a much grander plan for you? If you dictate that you want the plan to look like X, but the plan actually needs to be Y and Z, you're going to stop that from actually manifesting. And again, the universe, God, goddess, whatever name you want to put on it, is just going to sit back and be like, all right, I've got all of this stuff ready to come your way, but until you are open to receiving that, until you are open to the possibility that something can be grander than what you possibly could imagine, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, that's so true. And something I've actually been working with just in the past few weeks. I've done this really big deep dive, and I've come to find that I thought I was really in my feminine. I thought I was really in touch with my intuition and allowing my life to flow. I thought I was in touch with that. But more so, I have a huge wound in my feminine and I have a very hard time receiving. And I've come to terms with the fact that I'm very much in my masculine. I can get a lot done. I don't know much about human design. I know I'm a generator, so I know that I can go, go, go. I have a lot of fixed energy in my chart. So you ask me to do something, I'll get it done and I'll go above and beyond that. But in order to actually slow down and receive and find stillness, another piece in my chart is I don't have a lot of water. So slowing down is really, really hard for me. But we're all going to be challenged with that in the next 3 years now that Saturn is in Pisces, to figure out where we have been unable to flow with life and where we've been trying to chase things and force things versus letting them come to us. Like if our field and our ability to clear our field through breath work or meditation, yoga, doesn't matter, ecstatic dance, if we can have certain tools to clear our field, we will attract the things that will get us to that next level. But if we don't trust that and we try to control it, that means we're not able to trust ourselves. And that's been my big, my lesson for this year is learning how to fully trust myself, which is challenging, right? Because
Absolutely.
it comes from childhood of not being able to trust, the world in a lot of ways, but it doesn't matter. We have to be able to trust ourselves. We're in control of ourselves, not what happens in the world, but within ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of that systemic and parental conditioning is also our parents not allowing us to actually trust ourselves. And a lot of times, especially in, I don't have human kids, but I have a pretty big awareness and kind of see the picture of how much of the world is starting to treat children. It's like, oh, don't do this. Oh, don't do this. Oh, don't do this. And it's trying to keep them in this safe little bubble instead of trusting their own human instincts, trusting that they know themselves more than anybody else will ever know them, if they are
Yes.
allowed to. But if they're confined into this little box that says, oh no, don't trust your body. Oh no, don't trust the outside world. Oh no, don't trust that or this or that or this, that's when we start to develop that lack of trust within ourselves that we don't actually know better,
Yeah.
when the true answer is we do.
We have, I love, especially now we're moving into Aries energy. So I've been really thinking about that first step that we have to take, right? That initiative energy, that fresh energy. So when we're a child and we're learning how to walk and we don't fall down and bump our heads and get scratched up and fail, more or less, if we don't learn how to fail in life, then we're never going to be able to take those necessary risks. And we're going to stay in that bubble. We're going to stay in that place of comfort versus growth. And literally everything on us is constantly growing and changing and evolving. Our cells in our body, our skin cells, our hair, our everything on us is changing and evolving. And I think because people are in such that scarcity and limited mindset, it induces fear onto the child or whoever, especially, and even in my work, I noticed if I wasn't believing in myself or I felt limited, it transferred to whoever I was working with. And that's why my life felt so limited, because I wasn't in full trust and able to take those risks. And knowing that we're supposed to fall on our face and fail because that's how we learn and that's how we get better, versus doing what is comfortable and what we know and what's familiar.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to also project onto others our own wounds and fears and expect, because we experienced that thing, that they will also experience that same thing unless we protect them from it. But how many of us, and your story speaks of this, of the greatest challenges that you've faced in your life were also the greatest catalysts for major growth. But
Yeah.
if we're not allowed to go through those challenges, we can't yield that same growth. And I sometimes wonder of like, how different would life be? And I know everything happens for a reason and it's happens the way it's meant to happen. So it can't be different. But I do sometimes contemplate on, if I was allowed to make more mistakes, if I allowed myself to take more risks and make more mistakes, where would I be now? Would I have been able to grow much faster within my spiritual journey by taking more mistakes, or, um, you know, taking that bigger dose of mushrooms, if you will, to dive deeper into it instead of being like, I'm not quite sure. I'm afraid it might be a bad experience. So I'm just gonna take a little. But what
Mm,
happens if you just took a lot and you just trusted the
yeah.
process?
And I also think that's so beautiful. And also I think baby steps are good too. Like
Mm.
it's okay to like take small steps to make up the bigger picture. And I have your chart pulled up. I hope that's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Uh, but I'm looking at your chart and you have your rising sign in Virgo. So it's like you want to perfect it before you put it out into the world. But your moon and is in Aries. It's like, but internally you're like, but I want to go and take that risk no matter what. So stepping out of like, it needs to be perfect all the time and it can be messy. And like, especially with healing in general, healing is not pretty. It's like it's really, I mean, the other day I going through the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows, but I just cried and it was like such messy tears, like snot bubbles and just like red face, really deep crying, but it was so cathartic. And like knowing that it can be messy actually makes it so much more beautiful because that reminds us of our humanity, right? And yeah, so just with all of that, like know that it doesn't have to be perfect in order to get started. Like if I would have thought that when I started all of this, I probably wouldn't have even taken that first step because it has not been linear, this process in my work, in my relationships, in my healing, like all of it. So I think that's really important to remember. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it does take time, right? The
Yeah.
lessons have to come and build like those building blocks, like I said, in order to get us to that point so that when we do get to that awareness or recognition or whatever it is, we can appreciate it that much more.
Right. Well, and we do have to crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run. But when we already know how to walk really, really good, but we're too afraid to run,
Yeah.
that I think is really where we have to be willing to take that risk and just do it instead of, like you said, waiting for it to actually be that perfect moment to let something out there, but instead to just do it and see what happens. And if it's a flop, it's a flop.
Yeah.
You learned something from that, and then now you can try again with that newfound knowledge from actually failing. And I used to be so afraid of failure,
Yeah.
so afraid of, and maybe my chart is kind of an explanation of that,
Yeah.
is just that fear of doing something wrong. But having failed multiple times throughout my life, I'm now on my third business, but I have opened probably 6 or 7 over the years. And some of them didn't go anywhere because it either wasn't the right time or it wasn't the right thing, or the implementation of it just was not exactly the way that it needed to be. But as I've started to learn new things from those failures, it now has allowed me to implement different things into the current businesses that I have that have made them a success from the very, very beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
before
that's
we
it.
dive more into the chart and kind of some explanations on how astrology works, for the people that might be listening who maybe don't have a lot of experience with astrology, or maybe have the belief that astrology is just a bunch of woo-woo and there's not a lot of sense to it, what would you say to those people that are a little skeptical on it?
That's good to be skeptical. First of all, I think it's so important in anything that we do that we should have a little bit of skepticism. We have to have that discernment before we actually fully dive in. Just like it's really important, no matter what, especially if you're working with like a healer or anyone, a coach, at any single thing that you do, we have to have discernment. So go within and see how you feel when it comes up, but also be open to learning and be curious about it versus immediately shutting it off. So that's my first thing. The second thing I would say, such an ancient science that has been, how do I want to put this? I want to say shunned from society because it gives the power back to the people. Carl Jung said that psychology would be a dinosaur science without astrology. And there's been, obviously there's a lot coming to the surface around how much corruption has happened in the world, has been going on in the world, what's been lingering in the shadows. But astrology is a tool that gives us, it's basically a blueprint to our life, and it helps us access the cycle of being through. I don't do predictive astrology necessarily because we are so powerful. Our minds are so powerful. So I could say something to a client and they could manifest it, right? So I really guide people with their chart to give them their power back in decision making and knowing where their lights, their shadow parts are, and their light, the light is within them. So astrology is just, it's a tool that we get to use. And yeah, so that's kind of a long-winded answer, but to sum it up, I think it's important to have skepticism, but it's also important to be open to the possibility that it could be used in your own life.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And I saw a post a couple of months back that somebody was sharing something on the full moon and how, you know, the full moon plays a big part within astrology. And they used the analogy of, okay, we all can agree that the earth is covered in 70% water. That's a scientific fact. We can all agree that, give or take a few percentages, the human body is made up of around 70% of water. Again, scientific fact.
Mm-hmm.
So if the moon has the capability to alter the tides of the ocean on Earth due to its phases, wouldn't it also in turn have the capability of altering the water within our body the same way it alters the ocean's tides? Therefore, when we experience a full moon, that's why there's always the saying, is it a full moon? Why is everybody acting crazy? You know, and the more and more you start to follow these phases and the information that comes around what each phase actually means, it actually starts to make a whole lot more sense on why we feel certain ways during certain periods of the month and different during other periods.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that goes even to women's cycles and their menstruations. Everything is cyclical. So knowing, like what you said, how we are literally bodies of water ourselves, and there's going to be a lot coming out this year in particular. It's a 7-year in numerology, so it's the year of the mystic, and really learning how to combine science with spirituality. And astrology is going to, I think there's going to be a whole shift in perspective in how astrology is viewed. Astrology was used in schools previously, like in different ancient societies, like the Mayan culture, for example. They would literally use people like birth charts. Well, they wouldn't have a chart like I have it on my iPad, but they would use where all the planets are in the sky to help determine what each person in society should do for like work, essentially. And it's like, that is so profound to give you that direction point instead of running around aimlessly. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, it gives you that pinpoint of, okay, it doesn't have to be exactly like this, but it also gives me permission to be exactly who I'm meant to be in this lifetime. And I think that's what's the most beautiful part about astrology. It gives us that permission slip. That's what Deborah says all the time, and I love that. It's so wise.
Mm. And I think it also teaches us areas of where no matter how much we want to be a specific, do a specific career or be a specific type of person, if that's not really the way that we came into this world, we can try as hard as we want, but the likelihood is it's probably not going to happen the way that we actually want it to, because it wasn't designed that way.
Yes. Yes. And that's so beautiful. And just for you in your chart, you have your midheaven. So that's the career point. It's your reputation. It's how really the world is going to see you in that professional lens. And yours is in Gemini, which is the connector between heaven and earth. And through your voice, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So through your communication, through embodying and speaking your truth, spreading the word, networking, seeing both sides of a situation, expressing yourself, embodying the duality of it all, especially with that Aries and Libra energy you've got going on as well. You are encouraging others to do the same. You are that connector between heaven and earth. And you actually have your a wound point in that area as well. So that's why it's been so challenging for you to step into this next role. But as before we even jumped into the conversation today, you said you did 2 other podcasts and you said you feel so lit up. And it's because you're stepping into your midheaven. That is the direction you're supposed to head in this life. And yeah, so I'm curious, does that resonate with you? How does that land for you?
Oh, it resonates 100%. And it actually makes a lot more sense of why I've felt for a very long time to create a podcast.
Yeah.
Because the podcast is an area where I've been able to share my voice. It's where I've been able to share my story. And I've gotten so many beautiful messages from people that by just hearing me share my story and the challenges that I have gone through and I've overcome throughout my life makes them feel that much better that they can also do the same thing. Because we don't have to be 50 steps ahead of somebody else in order to help them. We only need to be 2 or 3. And it's actually easier for somebody else to see that it's possible if we're only 2 or 3 steps ahead of them, instead of, oh, well, that person's so far beyond where I am, I'm never going to be able to get there.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I also have shifted into the career of being a coach and facilitator, because it again gives people that permission that, oh, if he knows how to do it, maybe I should come to him to help me get there that much faster. And that is 100% my passion behind being a coach is I want to see the people that I work with get to where I am or beyond faster than it took me.
Change the story in a lot of ways.
Exactly. I mean, I've done rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole only to get to the end of the rabbit hole and realized it was a dead end. And now I had to climb my way back out and find a different path. So instead, if I can now hand somebody the map that says, okay, avoid that hole, avoid that hole, avoid that hole, and focus here, here, and here, and then you'll get there.
Because you gave permission to yourself and now you give that permission back to others. And that's why I love astrology, because it gives you that permission to have grace in your process. And I love that. That's so beautiful. You are a storyteller. Gemini is the story that we're creating for ourselves, but it requires us to get out of the mind, right? And so the stories that you told yourself about, I shouldn't do this, or I'm looking at your chart, Virgo rising, I shouldn't perfect this. It's like, no, that's not my story anymore. And the imperfection is what makes it perfect. And you're giving that back to whoever you're working with. And you want to be in service. You're here to be in service to others, but you have to be in service to yourself first. And I have my moon in Virgo, so I can totally resonate with that in a lot of ways. I also wanted to say that you're a full moon baby. Did you know that? So you were born pretty close to the full moon, and you are here to help others. You shine a light on those rabbit holes so that you can help us illuminate that and embrace the darkness and the shadows, which is my entire life, because I have my midheaven in Scorpio and I have Pluto there, the ruling planet of Scorpio. So I had to move through my own trauma in order to help others do that as well. And that has been a huge awakening, even just with the breath work too, because I just went through my Saturn return, and that's a whole big time of transformation. So yeah, I'm glad that you know you're a full moon baby, because now that maybe that if you're saying when the full moon comes around, it makes people act kind of crazy. You actually, that's when you light up, really. Like that's a really potent time for you to tap into your energy and show off, not show off, but show up and illuminate and start those new projects, put yourself out there. So permission for you today to do that.
That's really fascinating because I want to say maybe like 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, my wife Rachel and I, we started doing full moon ceremonies. Like she is very much about the moon phases, moon magic, and kind of getting into more of that spiritual aspect. She's really finding her power within the spiritual realms, and
Yes.
what works with her is different than what works with me, but we like to do things together a lot of the time. And so we'll make some cups of cacao and we'll sit down with our tarot and oracle cards and our journals. And she's started creating some ritual altars for that. And she pulls a couple of cards. The last time we did it, I pulled 7 cards because I was just like, okay, I want all this information here. But now that really makes sense of when I do those, so much comes to me in those ceremonies. And with every fiber of my being, I know that they are true messages that are coming outside of me to help show me the way of where I need to go in the next month. So that's, and this is the fascinating thing about astrology, human design, the gene keys from Richard Rudd, like all of these various different things that are all based on the phases of the solar system, not just the phases of the moon, because, you know, quantum physics states everything is energy. So we can all agree on that's a scientific fact now. And if everything is energy, and the energies are manipulated by the rotation of the planets, by the rotation of the sun, by the rotation of the moon, it makes sense that all of these things do have varying different aspects and will manipulate how we can show up in the world. Now, to take that even further, the podcast that I just finished recording with Michael and Mackenzie McPherson from Fly Cacao Drinking Chocolate, we were talking about it, how cacao is a singular species, but depending upon where it is grown dictates its certain phenotype and how that shows up. And the chuncho cacao that's grown in Peru is different from the, I think it's called Creole cacao that's grown in Guatemala. And they taste different. Their texture is different. It just goes to show that if you were born in one area at a certain time, that is going to be different than somebody else who is born in a different area at a different period of time, because the energy of those areas are going to affect how you show up into the world.
And even twins, that, like, I've been asked, like, oh, like, but what about a twin who has the same birth chart? The energies can show up very differently, right? It's not just your sun and your moon, it's your Mercury, it's your Mars placement, it's Venus, Saturn, Pluto, like all of those planets have different conversations with one another. That's how I like to view it. And so to know that we are going to present different energies in different ways, again, it gives us that permission to just be ourselves. And that requires us to go inward. And like you were saying, like acknowledge when this is my truth. Like during the full moon, you say that I know that this is my truth. This is resonating, these cards, these messages. But that requires work in itself to know when it is your truth and when it's not. When it, I like to ask the question, and it's not always this, but like, is this my trauma or is this my truth? That's a big one that I like to ask my clients in particular, because it's not always that, right?
Right.
And then also I wanted to say, so 6 months ago, you started doing the full moon ceremonies?
Roughly, I think so, yeah.
That was literally when your full moon happened, the Aries full moon, because we're about to go into the next cycle of the Libra full moon, and you have your moon in the 7th house of connection and relationships and how we relate to the world. So you pulled 7 cards for a reason, right? And there's different layers to that, of course, but I just wanted to illuminate that part because I thought that was fascinating, because you're very in tune with it.
Yeah, well, and so I love numerology, and so it's interesting that you bring up the fact that so that was the seventh house. I
Hmm.
pulled 7 cards, and we are now in a year of 7. And for those of
Yes.
you that are questioning of like, well, it's 2023, how does that equate to 7? We'll take the 2 from 2000, the 2 from 20, and the 3 from 3, add those together, and 2 plus 2 plus 3 equals 7. So that's how we
Yes.
dictate of what number each year is. Now, if you want to take that a little bit further and figure out like, I'm kind of going a little bit into another podcast episode that we're going to be doing, but while we're on it, let's go ahead and do it. So if you want to figure out what your life number is, you
I was going to
take,
bring that
okay, well, I'll let you take it
up.
then.
Oh, I was going to bring that up. So I was going to bring up your life path number, but you
Yeah.
explain you can explain the process of that, but I'll explain your life path number.
Well, since you're a guest here, I'm gonna let you take it
Okay,
since you were
okay.
already gonna bring it up. I'm just reading into the energy in the conversation.
Deal. So your life path numbers, you have to add your birth date and the year together. So uh, your birthday is October 9th, 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that's okay. I shared
Yep.
that. So you add 10 plus 9 plus 1984. You add those numbers individually. So 1 plus 9 plus 1 plus 9 plus 8 plus 4. And that's your life path number. And it's from 1 to 9. And then there's, of course, um, I don't know much about numerology, but then you can go into those higher numbers, 11, 22, 33.
Yeah.
Your life path number is 5. And I know that you lead a lot of inner child work, like sessions. And 5 is the number of the inner child, the playfulness, the fun factor, but it also explains why things constantly change for you within your business and your career and your life. With living in a van for how long did you live in the van for?
Well, we've lived in the bus for a little over 4 years now. We're not
Okay.
currently living in the bus; it's parked in the driveway. But yeah, and now we are entering into the 5th year of that, and now it's time for a change.
There you go. That's it. And I'm in a 7-year, and we're in a 7-year collectively. So I feel so in tune with the collective as I'm creating projects in the future and those kinds of things. Like I really feel tapped into that energy, but I wouldn't have been able to do that without that self-inquiry, that self-actualization, which has been all of 2022 up until this point. I've been doing a lot of that deep, deep work.
Yeah. Well, and it's what's also interesting about, and I'm pretty sure I've touched on this during season 1 in one of the podcasts. I mean, we're 30 some episodes in now, so it's kind of hard to remember everything that I've discussed, but there's a thing called the 7-year cycles that I'm sure you're familiar with. And so this being a year of 7, we are ending a 7-year cycle as a collective. And next year we will be starting a new cycle, which it coincides with, it's also going to be a year of 8. So
Yeah.
8, for those of you that don't know, is a number within numerology that's all about abundance. So next year is going to be a beginning year, but also a year of abundance. So if you have been waiting to call in abundance into your life, let me tell you, next year is going to be a year for the record books.
And you're in a year 8 right now. So this is your year of abundance. That's why the podcast is happening. That's why these connections are happening. And you have to go through that 4-year. I'm at life path 4, and it's like having the foundations. You got to build all the walls on the house before we can go into that 5-year of the adventure and the excitement. And then the 6-year is really, so on and so forth. And just like astrology as well, I always say, like, someone's like, oh, I'm not a Taurus, but you have Taurus in your chart. We all have the signs in our chart, and they make us all up. Whether you have 3 planets there or no planets there, it's still a part of who you are. And there's a different flavor of energy that you get to work with. So if you have awareness with that. So for me, for example, I have Gemini in my 4th house. So when I'm home, the 4th house rules our home, and I have Gemini there. It's really hard for me to focus unless I have a game plan. Sometimes I have to leave the house to work, or I have to move my energy before I work. But just as an example, so if you know those little details, it can change your entire life. And that's what happened with me. It gave me permission to be eccentric and kind of a weirdo because I have my rising sign in Aquarius. And I went to a private Catholic school my whole life. And oh, not my whole life, kindergarten through high school, I went to private Catholic school. And I was told, you can't think this way. Why are you asking these questions? They would shut down a lot of the questions I
Mm.
had, and it's because I was thinking in the future. I've always been kind of that weirdo, but I embrace it now. I embrace the astrology. I embrace that part of me because it's who I am. I'm
Yeah.
here to bring us to the future in these different modalities
Yeah, it's all about
through community.
I mean, I feel like the time period that we're in, this is known as like the year of the mystic, right? So it's
Yes.
all about owning your weirdness,
Hmm.
like letting your weird flag fly and
Yeah.
not being afraid to. And that's been what's so beautiful about the podcast for me is I am sharing things that I've wanted to share for years, but have been too afraid of judgment from others to do that. And whereas now, like, I don't swear much on the podcast, but I'm like, fuck it. Like, this is who I am. This
Yeah.
is how I've built my life and how I have found my truths throughout my journey
Yes.
with these things. And, it's like I kind of tiptoe when it comes to my Instagram of like what to share, what not to share, what's the algorithm going to like, what's the algorithm not going to like. So I've kind of been taking a little bit of a break on
Yeah.
sharing some stuff. I really haven't put my face on my stories or even on reels or anything lately because I've really been trying to sit with myself and figure out like, how do I actually want to show up in that space? And what do I actually want to share? And I'm starting to come to the terms with it doesn't matter what the algorithm likes.
Yes.
I need to just share my truth and share what I want to share. And I'm sorry if I make a video that's a little too long and the algorithm doesn't like it, that video is going to speak to someone. And even if it's just one person that video reaches, that's all
Yes.
that matters because maybe that one person was what that video was meant to talk to in the first place. If it talks to 1,000 people, that's great too, but I'm not really about the numbers anymore and what's going to gain me more followers, what's going to make me lose followers. Like if you're meant to be here on this journey with me, you're meant to be here on this journey with me. If you're
Yes.
not, you're not, and that's cool too. I'm not
Yes.
really attached to that outcome anymore. And that's part of what kind of following this path and learning more about my human design, about my chart, about the various different things that are kind of ruling the energetic aspects of myself are really
Mhm.
allowing me to tap into.
Going back to that taking risks portion,
Yeah.
right? It's that was me too. I was doing astrology videos and trying to come up with content, and it felt forced, going back to that forced piece rather than the flow. And I've just started to make content that I want to make. I'm going to put stuff out that I want to make. And I've been called a witch. I've been called like that woo woo stuff you do. That's so weird. Like I've been called a lot of things. And of course it shakes you and it rocks you. But I've also known like, so what? I am a witch. A witch is someone that is in tune with the natural cycles of life. What a gift. Reframing that, right?
Mm.
And stepping out of that box and playing small. I've read a lot of books and listened to a lot of things about people on their deathbed and near death experiences. And it's fascinating to me. I've got a lot of Scorpio energy in my chart. And the number one thing that they say, like the number one regret that people have on their deathbed is that they didn't take enough risks in this lifetime
Yeah.
because of the fear. And our ancestors are like screaming at us, saying, please, please take the risks and the chances that we weren't able to take. Like my grandfather grew up in the Great Depression. There's no way in hell he could have taken those risks because he was trying to survive, right? Like, so now the world has changed so much and there are opportunities. Like I said, the opportunities are endless. The possibilities are there, but we have to take that first step. And yeah, so kind of just coming back and circling back to that, that's been a really big motivator for me this
Mm.
past year in particular. It's like, I don't want to have that regret. So if I make a video and it doesn't appeal to someone and they call me a witch, so be it. I knew that I know that I'm coming from my heart and leading from my heart. And that leads into radical self-love and full truth and full trust of self.
Well, and the basis for the word witch really came from wise woman.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's what a witch really was, is because,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, she understood the cycles of nature. She understood what plants healed, what plants
Mm-hmm.
hurt. I mean, there's of course, if you really get into herbology, any plant in a high enough dosage can do damage. Any plant at a minimal dosage can be of benefit, even
Yeah.
if it is technically quote unquote poisonous for us to. I'm not saying go out there and take some poisonous herbs and hurt
Right,
yourself,
right.
but like,
Discernment.
yeah, do your research and you'll start to find out that many things that for a very long time, and cannabis can even be looked at this, like it
Mm-hmm.
was portrayed as, the devil's grass or the devil's
Mm-hmm.
medicine, and it would overtake you and make you do things that you don't want to do, when
Yeah.
the reality is science is now starting to prove it has many, many medical benefits taken in the right context,
Yes.
taken in the right dosage for the right person, for the right thing. All of the science that's going into psychedelic medicine right now that is
Mm-hmm.
also starting to show the same thing, of massive benefits of MDMA working for PTSD and depression, psilocybin also working for PTSD, depression, helping cancer patients kind of overcoming their fear of death and being okay with that next transition. Like,
Yes.
all of these amazing things that are starting to have light shed on them purely from the time that we are in, of the collective being open to receiving these messages, and thankfully to the internet, of not really allowing mass media to dictate what is going to be shared and what isn't going to be shared. Now it's kind of a free for all, and if you want to find that information, it's there. You might have to look really hard, but the information is there and the truths are out there if we're willing to look for it.
And usually if you ask out to the universe, like I did with my last year of coming into breathwork, usually the answer provides, like, shows up in some way, shape, or form. It might take some time, but if you're patient, the answer always shows up. I've definitely done plant medicines and psychedelics and all of that. And every time I've done it, it hasn't been forced. It's because I was open to it and
Yeah.
it came into my life. And a lot of people I've talked to, that's the same experience. And that's with anything, right? It's all of these things we're talking about. It gives the power back to the people.
Mm.
And the powers that be don't want that, right? They want us to be disempowered, to be in that small contracted state. So even just with breath work, there's been such a huge movement with that, not even just in the training we did, but like people are curious about it because it's something that it's a modality and a tool that we get to use that helps us heal from the inside out versus the other way.
Right.
And again, it's just giving us that power back because we are so powerful. Our minds are so powerful, like I said. But if our nervous system is dysregulated, then we're going to be picking up on those contracted ideas and beliefs versus knowing what our truth is. And it's a constant evolution. And I'm not perfect by any means, and I have a lot of work to do on myself. But to be at this point in my life, I'm not as reactive because of the breath work. I'm not as um, altered. Like I can be in my center. I should say I can be in that alignment, and that's when the flow it's coming. Right, I'm doing the work, but it's coming, and I feel it, and I'm attracting opportunities like this and clients and people who I never would have talked to before, but they are so open to it because they can feel it in my being. So if we want the change and if we want change in the world, it starts with us. And people think that they can't make a big change in the world with the collective, with how batshit crazy it is right now. Like everything is breaking down so that we can break through. And change starts with us. And that is the first step into really shifting the collective's future in a lot of ways. It starts with us, and just even like the smallest thing of talking to ourselves differently and not leaning into that negative self-talk and changing the story, moving our bodies every day. That's the biggest one. I always say, like, if we're strong in our bodies, we can have strength through life. Like, it's so important to take that first step within ourselves. Don't overcomplicate it. I don't know if you watch The Office. I always quote The Office when Michael says, keep it, or Dwight says, the best advice Michael ever gave me was keep it simple, stupid. So it's like, really, don't overcomplicate it. We're here to be. So start with that. Be with the experience, be with your emotions, be with your thoughts. Don't judge them, just witness them like waves in the ocean. And then you can take the step forward, right? A feeling, I've been learning, it only lasts 90 seconds. So don't let that rock your entire world. If you need to go take a couple deep breaths, do it. If you need to go walk, take a walk with your dogs outside and go sit in the park without your phone, do it. If you need to, I don't know, there's so much. It's go sit in the sunshine. That's my favorite one, being the Leo that I am. I love to go and just let the sunshine hit my skin. And that is my remembrance of my humanity and what it means to be alive in this human experience. It's so simple. It's so simple.
That's great. That's wonderful advice. So I think now would be a great time to segue into the Embrace and Expand signature question of what did you have to embrace in your life, Hali, in order to expand into the person you are today?
So I've been reflecting on this, and I pulled the shadow card this week. I pull a card, an archetype card every week, just to see what I need to focus on or what I'm needing to embody. And when you pose that question, when I've been really reflecting on it, and two things came to mind. I've had to embrace my shadow and death. So it's a little morbid, but I guess that's my midheaven and Scorpio, Pluto, all that energy. But if we don't illuminate our shadow and acknowledge it and accept it and integrate it, we can never transmute it. And we have to learn how to dance with our shadow. A practice that I actually do, I go outside when it's super sunny and I'll dance. I'll put my headphones on and I'll dance with my shadow. Like, I'll look at my shadow and dance with her. And that has allowed me to embrace, again, my humanity and my true authentic self. Because for a long time I shamed my shadow. I felt guilty in a lot of ways. I was embarrassed by it. And that process of acknowledging the shadow has really allowed me to embrace the multiple ego deaths that I've had to experience. So when I go into the death portion, it was the literal deaths that I experienced in my life, but also the deaths within myself. And I think that's really not talked about enough in the healing journey, is the fact that when you shed a version of yourself that you no longer want to be, it requires us to grieve that past version of ourselves. And we shed these layers so that we can be reborn. All last year, I said I was like in my cocoon phase because I was looking at the shadow, like I was touching it, I was living it, I was embracing it and embodying it. And because of that cocoon phase, I'm ready to come out like a butterfly. Like, isn't it that before they go into a cocoon, you're in the mush and the muckiness and so you have to embrace that part. And then the rebirth can happen. The transformation can happen. The radical self-love can happen because we start to love all parts of ourselves. But we have to let go of the shame, the blame, the guilt, the embarrassment, whatever that is, instead of living there. And so I've had to embrace my shadow and allow those parts of myself that I don't want to bring into my future to die off so that I could expand into the person I am today. And people recognize the difference now because I've taken the time to go there, but people are afraid to go there. And it goes back to that taking that risk. You have to take that first step, and it's okay to be afraid to look at it, but it has to happen in order for that transformation to ever occur.
Yeah. Yeah. That couple of things that came to my mind as you were saying that. And the first is a lot of people have messaged me of they really want to try breath work, but they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid of what they might face. They're afraid of what they might experience. And my answer always is, well, yeah, you might have to face some things that are challenging. But on the other side of that, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
If you want to be in a different place than where you are now, you have to take some risk. You have to make some change. Change will never happen if you're not willing to change. Things will just
Mm-hmm.
continue to be the same. So it's almost like you need to be willing to take that leap of faith into yourself. And the beauty with breath work is it's very different than going on a plant medicine journey where you're on a ride for however long it's going to be in your system. Some of it's
Whatever that energy brings.
exactly. Like I have a very fast metabolism, so I tend to metabolize those things a little bit quicker. So journeys
Same.
tend to be not quite as long for me as they are for many others. But with breath work, it's you and your breath.
Yes.
If it gets too intimidating or it gets too scary, well, guess what? You change your breath pattern. You
Yes.
slow it down and just come back to the self. You can stop at any given point in time. So therefore, it really is one of the most transformative experiences that you can do, but can also be as gentle as you need it to be
Yes.
without having any specific agenda or any specific trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing just escaped my mind. So we'll
I was
see.
going to
We'll see
say,
if it comes
if it
back.
comes back up, I was going to say, with breath work, with even astrology, with like doing something that's new, you have to let go of control. And the people in my life, I'm going to be totally honest and transparent. They have called me a control freak for as long as I have known myself. So that has been part of my process of my healing is I have to let go of control, because if I can't even trust my own body, say in a breathwork session, we always say like, this is an opportunity to learn how to let go and trust the innate intelligence that is your body, even with personal training and all of that. If we can't let go of control, we can never surrender into that full trust of self. And that's going to be our biggest block in life if we can never actually let that flow through us, right? Like that intuition, that truth that's just wanting to seep out of us if we can't let go of control. And that's the biggest thing, and that was a big part of my shadow, was learning how to let go of control and knowing, like, instead of going in with a mindset when I'm working with a client of this is how it's going to go, nope, I'm going to trust that whatever needs to be talked about or whatever needs to come through will, but we have to trust it.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's a hard thing to do if you haven't done any work on it, but it's that first step. And it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that second thing came back to me is if you
Yay.
using the metaphor of going into your cocoon, and it's like that caterpillar transitioning into the butterfly. And I was recently listening to a podcast with Zach Bush.
Love him.
And he was talking about it, how researchers have found when they were studying the monarch butterfly that the caterpillar drops its head before it goes into the cocoon. Because it's almost like if you think about that, that's the same. You can use that metaphor as the spiritual journey. The moment you choose to drop your ego, and the moment you choose to drop that things are going to need to happen in a certain way, like you said, needing to drop that control, you then can go through that process of metamorphosis, of turning into a mush pile for a little while.
Yeah.
Dark night of the soul will do that to you.
Yeah.
And then transforming into the butterfly that you can then fly to heights that you never would have been to if you remained the caterpillar.
Yes. I think that's important, but it's also important to say, like, don't let go of the ego entirely, because that is the shadow, right? So if we're letting go of that, that means we're shaming it still. So it's like, actually, how can I embrace my ego? And that's why I love astrology, because it's part of that permission slip of like, that's who you are. That's your personality. Like, I am a full-blown Leo. I'm bubbly. I'm I've lived from my heart. I really embrace that. But the shadow side of that is I'm very insecure. And a lot of people wouldn't know that, but I'm very insecure, thinking, someone knows more than I do. But that's going back to trust.
Mm.
And that's embracing the ego of like, no, like my ego is also a part. But it adds to the bigger picture of it all. So we can't fully let it go, but we can also not let it rule our life anymore. And that's where, our ego is just trying to protect us. That's the biggest thing. I'm like, I know you're trying to protect me. I love you so much, but I have to still fly, even if it's going to not be a dangerous situation, even if I'm not safe in this situation. I'll never know until I try. So I love you, ego, but I'm going to put you in a nice comfy bed. Like I'm going to tuck you in, but I'm going to go take that chance. I'm going to take that first step. I'm going to put myself out there. And I think it's just important to not keep it hidden in the shadows. And then once we can embrace the shadow, oh, then the lightness comes through and it beams from our being. It's our essence, it's our life force, it's our vitality. And if we can balance both, oof, life gets really good. And I'm really, really experiencing that right now. It gets not easier, but it becomes it's embracing the pain, but also the beauty, because that's the duality of the world we live in. We can't live without either. So yeah, this is a big conversation, but I think that the more we can embrace our shadow, the more we can step into our light.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you touched on that, because, that's a big thought process within the spiritual awakening community, is that
Yeah.
I need to kill my ego. I need to get rid of my ego. And I recently went through a Reiki upgrade attunement a couple of months back, and William Rand, who is one of my teachers and mentors, was talking about that in this new upgrade. It's called Holy Fire 3. So it's the third level of kind of channeling that he's received of where the energies are shifting into. And he was talking about it, how the ego isn't something that we need to get rid of. The problem with the ego is that many of us are operating from a wounded ego. And
Yes.
the wounded ego shows up as that egotistical person, that person that wants for certain things or needs to have the validity of other people looking up to them, needs to have the big follower account, needs to show their highlight reel on Instagram instead of showing the vulnerabilities and everything that goes along with that. But
Mhm.
what he said was that the ego's real job is to help us to increase our level of consciousness, but
Yes.
it can only do that from a healed state.
Hmm.
And so what shadow work truly is, it's about healing the wounded ego.
Yes.
And operating from a healed ego is what will give us the confidence to be able to share our voice. It's what will give
Yes.
us the confidence to show up as our full authentic expression and actually be the person that we came here to be in the first place.
Mm. Yeah. I'm just like nodding my head in agreement. So in my chart, I have my sun, so my personality and my ego, my Mercury, the way I think and communicate, and my wounded point, like I was talking about in your chart, Chiron, all in Leo, which rules the ego. It rules out the sun, right? So, and it's all in my seventh house. So a lot of my shadow work has shown up in my relationships, which
Mm.
is a whole other conversation, but that's a good starting point, like to have those reflectors, that mirror, right? Even just like if you hire a coach, like you have that reflection. But I realized that I'm here to be big and loud, and I can have a million posts on my story. That's very Leo. I can do all those things, but it was wounded because it was wounded within my relationship. So once I healed that part of myself, then I really could go into my own depths and my shadow. And it's a totally different game now, because now I feel like I'm able to inspire people through my vulnerabilities, because I wasn't able to be vulnerable before. I shared something really big in the training that we did in like our graduation day that I hadn't shared with anyone other than my husband and my therapist. And it was the first time that I actually allowed myself to be fully vulnerable with, I don't even know how many people were in there, like 30, 40 people. And I shared my truth, and I felt like a different person just by voicing what needed to come through and not holding it within. So, such a beautiful reminder. I'm glad you brought that up as well. It's like our vulnerabilities are how we can relate to one another. It's how we connect to one another, because it reminds us of how similar we all really are. We're moving through this experience and we can't do it alone. And we have to share what's truly on our heart, because then we're never going to actually feel into the person we're with, because we're not sharing all parts of who we are. And like Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. And it's just, I say that in every interview or anything I do. I always say that quote because it's just so profound to remember that we're not alone in this process, and we have to be vulnerable. And it's scary to do it, but again, you got to take that risk.
Right.
It's so important. That's how we shift the collective's consciousness. It's how we do it. It starts with us. Going back to that, it starts with us on an individual basis.
Well said.
Thank you.
So as we kind of wind down here in the episode, I just want to see if there's one piece of advice that you could give to our listeners that if they feel like they kind of want to look more into their astrology chart or look more into just the patterns within themselves, what would you give them?
Well, you could check out my website. But also maybe like check out different astrologers too. I think it's so important to be really curious and just start to like see what's out there, what information is out there. But I always say start with the moon. The moon rules the mundane people more or less. So, or in mundane astrology, the moon rules the people. So start with the moon and start to just, honestly, the biggest piece of advice I could give before even diving into your chart or anything, go spend some time outside in nature. And when there's a full moon, go stare at that full moon and connect to that full moon and tune into that energy without anything else. Like, don't go into anything else, and see how you feel. Start there. And if there's something that you're wanting to know about yourself in this current stage of your life, go and ask some questions that way. And then if you really want to go dive deeper, go find an astrologer. You can check out my website. I know a bunch of different people. Like, there's so many beautiful astrologers out there, but start with that self-inquiry on your own first. And I love to go and just moon gaze and let myself bathe in the moonlight. And it's just a beautiful reminder that we're so connected to nature. We are nature. And that's the first step, is understanding, yeah, how connected we all truly are. So I don't know if that's the answer people want, but it's a start, right? It's a start. And put your crystals out with the full moon if you
That's
have
fantastic.
them.
So you mentioned your website. How else can people get a hold of you if they decide that they want to dive deeper in with you on astrology, breathwork, personal training?
So my website, and then I'm on Instagram. I'm part of my goal this year is to start a podcast as well. So thank you for allowing me to have this platform here. But yeah, those are the first two, the website and Instagram. I post videos. I have all my updates there. You can subscribe to, I do monthly newsletters, those kinds of things. So yeah.
Wonderful. And I will have all of that information down in the show notes below, so it's easy for you to find Hali's Instagram as well as her website. As you can tell, she's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to astrology and many other things. So I definitely would highly recommend tuning in and just seeing what resonates with you. So Hali, thank you so much for being here and talking with the listeners, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom.
Yes, thank you so much. And if there's anything I would say, just continue to follow your heart. Don't let the external noise distract you from your getting on your path and your journey. Just follow your heart, trust yourself, and let go. This is the time to let go and get into that. Yeah, we're changing. The world is changing really quickly, so we need to change with it as well.
Beautiful advice. Well, thank you all so much for being here, for listening to another wonderful conversation. Again, all of Hali's information will be down in the show notes, and greatly appreciate each and every one of you, and I'll catch you on the next one.